Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guests.
Our topic on the program today is the process to organizational wellness. From time to time we get to deal with a topic that we have not done before, or it's been a long time, and we're so pleased to have a great expert today to deal with organizations and what goes on in those organizations and how that may affect in a very positive or negative way the employees of that organization. Our guest is also a consultant with organizations, and we've had her to do some work for our human rights organization. She's absolutely outstanding. She holds a PhD from the University of Oregon. She teaches at Gonzaga University in the School of Professional Studies. I welcome to the program Dr. Nancy Isaacson. Dr. Isaacson, it's a pleasure to have you here. I had the pleasure of watching you in action and know how great you are on this subject.
Thanks, Tony. It's good to be here. Thank you.
And I'm so pleased to have our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and she will start the questioning today with Dr. Isaacson.
Dr. Isaacson, organizations have health just like individuals do.
Yes, they do.
And there are components that go into making up a healthy organization. What are some of those components?
Organizations can be thought of very similarly to people. And if you think about what does it take for us to stay healthy, and then try to think of those things as analogies for looking at organizations, you get a few tips. One of the things that keeps an organization healthy is to be very clear on what its purpose or mission is. And that's good for people too. When we get confused in our lives about what we're all about or what life means to us at that time, we don't tend to do very well. It's pretty stressful, and organizations are the same way. Another thing that is really important to organizational health is a good sense of boundaries. And boundaries are things that let in energy and information into an organization to keep it from becoming stale, to keep it from becoming closed to new ideas, things like that. Energy gets imported through boundaries of organizations, as well as people, and diverse people are necessary also for organizations to admit through their boundaries in various ways as employees or customers or clients. And one of the things that happens to organizational boundaries is that they can become too porous and let too much in, and things become very confused inside, and it's hard to find a sense of cohesion. But on the other hand, organizations can become too enmeshed. Their boundaries can become too closed, and there are other problems when that occurs. And the third thing I'll mention is that organizations need to have natural healing mechanisms that take over when the organization is injured in some way. Just like a person who falls down and cuts their leg, if you don't attend to that, the cut can get infected and can become a systemic infection pretty easily. And healthy bodies have white cells and scar tissue and all kinds of things that take care of that. Organizations get injured too, and healing mechanisms need to be in place.
When we're talking about organizations, just for the benefit of our viewers, we're talking about a wide variety of organizations.
Absolutely.
We're talking about employment organizations, places where people might work.
The workplace.
We're talking about schools.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about organizations to which people belong.
That's
We
correct.
might even be talking about churches.
We a lot of times talk about churches when we talk about issues of organizational health.
I read one of your addresses. It was the Tucker Lecture at
That's
Gonzaga
good.
University, and I was so taken by it. It's one of the best addresses that I've seen about what can happen to individuals and organizations. And
Thank you.
that's of great interest to me because of my life has been spent working in organizations, and I'm very fortunate to be where I am in a particular one. But you indicated in your speech something that really caused me to focus on the program today, and that is when organizations have certain things to happen within them to individuals, and sometimes that can be grievous.
Yeah.
And if those in position of responsibilities do not address that or a proper way, it has a devastating effect upon individuals' lives. So, kind of an involved question, but would you share with our viewers some advice to organizations about how they should deal with those issues when they arise, and secondly, the consequence it has for both individuals and that organization?
Well, one of the ways in which organizations can get unhealthy is to have unhealthy individuals exert powerful roles within them. There's quite a bit of research out there right now that shows that leaders at the top of organizations of any kind are predisposed to acting in ways that can abuse their position, and are also very susceptible to certain kinds of narcissistic traits. And I'm not by any means saying that just because a person is in a top position that person would be subject to either. Also, people who have informal kinds of power in organizations that may not be in top leadership roles would be very, very much in the same category. Working with a person in an organization that exerts a great deal of influence, and that person is not a healthy individual, can be very harmful, even traumatic to other employees, to customers even, although most of the time there are safeguards on that, and so it's the employee in a workplace that gets injured by another unhealthy person there. Your second question was, how do organizations safeguard against that? This is back to the healing, the natural healing tendencies. If there aren't good feedback mechanisms where people can name their issues and trust is very low and morale is very low, you tend to have situations that tend to become what we call undiscussable. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of things that everybody kind of knows is going on with an unhealthy individual, or more than one in some cases, but nobody can talk about it. So all kinds of safeguards to keep the undiscussables from happening are really important, and that has a lot to do with openness in the organization's culture and actively forming trust and systems that welcome people to speak out when there are issues. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's kind of the short answer to your question.
One other question on another subject. Go back to Janelle. One thing that I observed as a layperson looking at government and other organizations, and certainly not an expert by any means, but as organizations grow, be it in government or corporations, wherever it may be, and they become larger, there's a real tendency for impersonalization. And,
yes.
And one of my pet issues is the growth of the bureaucracy and the red tape, and that individuals within those organizations can find themselves more and more consumed with those real burdensome red tape issues and are not free enough to do what they were really hired to do.
That's right.
What advice do you have? How does an organization protect itself against too much bureaucracy?
Actually, there's a term for what you describe. It's called goal displacement, in which people tend to become very focused, over-focused on just keeping their own little task under control, that they lose sight of why they're there in the first place. Sometimes a new technology will do that. Everybody gets so into the computer or the new software or the new regulations for doing something that they lose sight of the customer or the service or the product or the goal of the organization. Again, open cultures that try to promote the opportunity for people to be good citizens in an organization, which means not just being loyal and committed and doing one's job, but organizations that define organizational citizenship as speaking up when something is wrong and attempting to lower the risk, solve problems at very early stages. And it's very clear when you walk into an organization whether this is going on or not. Rapid growth is one of the most injurious things to organizational cultures that happens, even though it generally is good news when we're growing, because everybody likes to grow. But so many things can happen that actually have a very high human cost, that it can have some pretty detrimental effects later on. So certainly awareness by people in leadership roles, and the extension of the concept of, the health of this organization is all of our business, and what kinds of things do we need to put into place in terms of structures and also cultural norms to keep ourselves healthy is never a bad investment of time.
I wish we had about 10 to 12 hours with you. I am so impressed with you, but one other quick thing about that a follow-up on that question is people have different mindsets, and some people, and I'm not trying to be judgmental, some people have this fascination with detail and love documentation in great detail. Others are, I don't know what to say other than that they're more philosophical and visionary and want to look at a bigger picture. An organization, I'm sure, has both of those, and how do you balance that process?
Isn't it wonderful that there are both kinds of people?
Yeah.
Actually, various governmental agencies and various other forms of rules and contracts are helping us with that detail. And so we do need people to take care of it and to be very attentive to it and hopefully like to do that. But it becomes another substitution of form for substance when that becomes the reason we're in business. If you talk to people in healthcare or social service agencies or even schools these days, and they will tell you, we can't provide the kind of care we want to provide to our patients or our students or our clients because we have to take time and do the paperwork. And it's almost more paperwork driven than anything else. I think we're going to hit a place where there's a great turning point with that, and but a lot of people will die under the load of paperwork between now and that time.
Janelle Berg, thank you.
Organizations have changed a great deal in the last 50 years, and can you explain to our viewers how they have changed and then why organizational health now is so threatened?
Again, going back to the analogy of the human body, Janelle, as a human being gets older, they tend to put on a little weight and lose a little hair and lose a little muscle tone and have things happen to their eyes and their teeth, and that happens to organizations too as they proceed through their life cycles. They're not as fit in many ways as they once were. And so organizations have a different time span to their life cycle, but you can pretty much tell the adolescent organizations from the mature ones from the ones in old age. And one of the reasons organizations are changing a great deal around us is because a lot of our institutions, like healthcare, the established religious denominations, certainly the public school system, government forms, and healthcare, which would be a major one right now, are in old age as organizations. And there are lots of essentially diseases of old age that organizations are predisposed to. So that's one reason. A second reason is that change is coming at all of us faster, with more of it from more directions, and it tends to be much more complex. And that hits us in our workplaces, and it hits us in our social service agencies and in our government organizations and in our schools. And how we deal with change wouldn't be a problem if we had all the time in the world to do it. But what's happening is the changes are coming faster and faster, they're bigger and bigger, and they are overwhelming the human ability to respond to that change in an effective way in organizations everywhere. So what we have is the analogy of a 70-year-old man who's overweight being asked to carry very, very heavy loads up several flights of stairs and to do it faster and faster and faster. And so organizations are essentially having stress-related, change-related dysfunctions as well. Those are two reasons that I think account for a lot of the stress we see.
In your writings, you talk about principled organizational dissent and
Yes.
how important that is to have good dissent and proper dissent within an organization, and that sometimes people will not, if they don't feel they can dissent, they will not say the real reason why they're leaving. They'll simply leave.
Right.
Would you please speak to principled organizational dissent, how that works?
Principled organizational dissent is a concept that comes out of the research on good citizenship in organizations. And again, healthy organizations tend to value strong citizenship behaviors from individuals. In the past, that good citizenship behavior has only been defined as commitment and loyalty in doing the job. But as far back as the founders of our country, dissent in terms of the responsibility of the citizen to speak up when something is wrong is recognized as very important. In organizations, when things are not working as well as they should, when there are unhealthy situations going on, ideally, everyone would feel safe and encouraged to speak up about it. But that's not happening universally. So principled organizational dissent is a description of certain processes and structures that an organization puts in place to protect people, to encourage them in some way to speak out when they feel the mission of the organization is being violated, when they think something unhealthy is going on. And it's again a way to foster trust, health, caring, as well as other kinds of organizational effectiveness.
I don't know where to go next. There's so many questions. Janelle, that was just so excellent, your question. When people are in high positions within an organization, I can feel for them, they have a lot of responsibility too, and it can be, as they've said over and over, lonely at the top. But it seems to me from my limited observations of different organizations that some individuals, it's like in the political arena, some political leaders have charisma, they have vision, and we rank them in history as great political leaders, and others are not so fortunate to be remembered that way in history. And it seems to me one of the great talents of a leader is to understand the organization well enough to know not only the mission of that organization, but the inner workings of how different people are contributing in different ways. What I'm trying to say is that some administrators have this tremendous gift to know if some persons and organizations are overloaded and others maybe are not carrying their adequate load. Is that something that can be taught, or is that like a charisma in a political leader? It's almost an inner instinct to understand the personnel.
Well, our program in leadership studies is sort of predicated on the ability that we can enhance people's leadership skills and ability, and do so through an organization like a university. But that's a perennial issue, and I was very struck by something I read the other day about charisma. In that charisma is two things. It's a form of personal ability to influence by traits an individual has. And So if you look at that and you say, well, can I develop traits, then perhaps there would be a way to teach charisma. But secondly, this book said, charisma is really about emotions. It's about the ability to feel passionate about something and to evoke passion in others. Hopefully, when we speak about evoking emotion in others, we want those to be good emotions, because we don't tend to call people who evoke negative emotions leaders. And so some understanding of emotional contagion between two people or between a leader and followers is important then to understand, because charisma has been very misused as well as used wisely by leaders throughout history.
I have to tap one of your other talents, and that is I've had the pleasure, as I indicated at the beginning of the program, to watch you coordinate and facilitate, well, in our case, a wonderful new human rights organization and its board. As you go in to work with an organization, and with your background, I'm sure you see almost immediately good or bad news, healthy or unhealthy. And as you take that organization through its board of directors or administrators, whomever it is, what do you look for? And another way of putting this is, to others who are doing this, what advice do you have of how do you become a successful facilitator? Obviously, you're called in because there's some need.
Okay. Being a facilitator is really different than being a consultant to an organization. So I'll speak about a little about both if
Please.
I could. The commonality to me is that when a consultant or a facilitator is coming in to try to be helpful, the cardinal rule I always try to keep right in the front of my mind is that people are doing the best they can do and the best they know how to do in almost every situation. They're trying to do complex things. They are doing it in a society that is got rampant change coming at it. People are overloaded in their personal lives, and yet they're trying to do their best in whatever group or organization they come to work collectively. The facilitator's role is needs to be really clearly defined. Does a group need help moving through a task, as the committee where you and I met each other was trying to do? Or does the group need help because there are interpersonal conflicts, because there are things that interpersonally aren't working for the people in the group? If that is happening, it's going to interfere with the task. So the facilitator needs to be very clear about the expectations. And the facilitator is there to help the group be more effective, not to push anybody's agenda. In fact, the facilitator in those situations should be very content-free. Then you have to be observant all the way through, because sometimes groups sort of wander off into areas that experience shows might be less helpful, and bring them back. Being a consultant depends on whether you're being hired to bring in special expertise and share it and give advice, or being the kind of consultant that I work with through the Center for Organizational Reform at Gonzaga, which is a process consultant, meaning helping people with the how of their work. Sometimes means teaching them, sometimes means facilitating with them. Certainly it means working with their ideas and their frustrations and their definitions of the situation, and is a partnership between an outsider that knows something about groups and organizations and the insiders who know their organization or their group. It tends to be a very effective way to help groups get over some bumps.
Janelle Burke.
We're not going to have very much time, but I know some of our viewers are going to say, there are certain problems in my organization. What are some of the ways that people react when they know there's a problem in their organization? And maybe some folks will identify with that, and then what can they do?
Just like healthy people get hangnails and headaches and colds and fall down and on the snow and break a bone, that problems are very normal. And it doesn't mean that you're in an unhealthy situation. Again, if you find that you're in an organization that has problems, I think asking oneself or trusted colleagues, do we have mechanisms to heal when we have problems? If the answer is no, or if people feel that certain organizations, not just a workplace, but maybe even a church or a voluntary organization, is sick, and people will say, this is a really sick place, then they're probably going to need to do something which would be akin to going to the doctor and getting an injection. The organizations that I worry about are the ones that deny that they have any problems, or that they can get sick, or that crises can happen within them. Because it's that attitude that tends to point to some of the more serious dysfunctions that we see. And that's a very sad situation, because there's a very high human toll that's being taken for the people who are associated with that kind of situation.
On that note, we have to bring our permanent conclusion. On behalf of Janelle Burke, our panelists, and our staff, Dr. Nancy Isaacson, it's been a pleasure having you here. What wisdom you've shared with us about organizations, and I'm sure that will be helpful to a number of our viewers who, most of them do work in some kind of organization. Ladies and gentlemen, as I've indicated, our guest has been Dr. Nancy Isaacson from Gonzaga University in the School of Professional Studies, and our topic today has been the process to organizational wellness. I hope you've enjoyed the program as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you, and my news for you is that Dr. Nancy Isaacson will be back next week, but in a very different role. She'll represent another person, and it will be very humorous. It will have a lot to do with the history of the South, and where she and I both come from, the South, and I think you will enjoy immensely this shift of gears to something else that she is very talented with. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.